Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jane Hunter. I'm a senior lecturer within the School of International Studies and Education, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar with our special guest, science teacher and public education advocate, Geoff McNamara AM. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation upon whose ancestral lands the UTS City campus now stands. I would also like to pay respects to the elders both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. Today's webinar is brought to you as part of a series of the UTS Aluminated, celebrating the achievements of successful alumni like Geoff, who've been recognised as the 2020 UTS Alumni Award recipients. Welcome to everyone who is joining us today, but before we begin, I would like you to note just a couple of housekeeping matters. This webinar is being recorded. The format for today is a 30-minute discussion with Geoff, and then we'll use the remaining time for questions and discussions from our audience. I would like to welcome questions during today's presentation, so please type them into the Q&A box in your control panel. Thank you to the people who have already submitted questions when registering. We will endeavour to get to as many of those questions as possible. But now to the reason that we're all here today, before Geoff tells us about where he is right now. Let me tell you a little bit about Geoff. Geoff's a passionate advocate for science and public education, and he works hard to empower students so that they feel confident to undertake higher level education in science and engineering. Geoff has been a teacher for 33 years, and from 2006 until just very recently, he taught at Melrose High School, where he developed a program called Science Mentors, which has now been rolled out across the ACT. Science Mentors ACT partners high school students with practicing scientists and engineers on research projects. The students get to design their own research questions, undertake rigorous scientific investigations, and deliver a final report on their findings. Students also get opportunities to work in university, government, and commercial laboratories as part of their research. And several of Geoff's science students have since gone on to pursue scientific and engineering careers. Geoff has won several major awards, including 2 ASG National Excellence in Teaching Awards, the Eureka Prize for Science Teaching, and the Australian Prime Minister's Prize for Science Teaching in Secondary Schools. In 2018, he was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for significant service to secondary education in the disciplines of science and astronomy. And now, in 2020, he is also the UTS Community Alumni Award recipient. We're really thrilled that he's been awarded that wonderful accolade. Geoff has also authorised over 100 articles in Australian and international science magazines, written 4 books, and built the McNamara-Saunders Astronomical Teaching Telescopes, and we give that an acronym called MSATT. It's actually at Mt Stromlo in Canberra. It's a professional high-grade teaching facility that's designed specifically for high school students. As part of these projects, Geoff has seen students use their own observations to calculate the speed of light, the distances to stars, and the evolutions of galaxies. Over to Geoff now, and let's get started and find out about Geoff's wonderful work.
Yeah, Jane, thank you very much for that introduction. Look, welcome to everybody that's joined in this afternoon. It's very nice to have you here. I'm sitting inside one of the 2 MSAT domes, and you can see behind me the the telescope. I'll just show you how she operates. So she'll move into position behind me. This is MSAT-1, which was the original telescope which we built up here for teaching high school students how to do science. And as Jane said in the introduction, the whole idea is to get students to do projects in astronomy using sophisticated equipment. So what I can do, in fact, is show you some photographs of both domes. So is it all right if I just share the screen now to show you what they look like at night?
That would be great, thanks, Geoff. And let's see what's in the Canberra night sky or late afternoon sky.
Well, at the moment, unfortunately, it's quite clouded, but hopefully you can see if I get this to work properly. There we go. So you should be able to see now the photograph of the two domes at sunset. We're actually in the left-hand dome at the moment. The only difference being that the shutter's closed because it's blowing a gale outside. And the right-hand dome is MSAT-2. This is a beautiful night shot. Shows the two domes. This photograph was taken by one of the doctoral students up here at Mt Stromlo, Barrett. He took these beautiful photographs for us. And inside the domes, this is what MSAT-1 looks like at night when the students are actually using her. And that's the second one. We've only just finished creating this telescope. This is a larger diameter instrument. So we use these two telescopes that kind of like having a sports car and a four-wheel drive. They have two different purposes. They do different things. And that was inherent in the design as well, so that these instruments can increase the range of projects that we can get the students to do. And that's what MSAT-2 looks like at night. That photograph was actually taken by one of the parents of the student that comes up here, showing the moon in the sky. So yeah, that's what MSAT is all about.
So Geoff, how did the MSAT telescope come about?
Well, the telescope itself, the telescope you can see behind me, has a bit of a long history. In fact, the tube itself, and I've got to give credit where credit's due, the telescope itself was purchased for me by my wife. She refused to let me turn 50 without having a high-end telescope. She said, "You've been interested in this all your life. You deserve this," she said. And so we got this telescope, and I chose the telescope specifically for teaching. Because, as you say, with science mentors, we've been able to partner students with scientists in every field and get them to do practical work in every field except one. And it was my great love, and that's astronomy. And that's where this idea of having a teaching telescope came from. And that's why I chose this particular instrument. But telescopes don't like being moved around. They're precision optical instruments, and so I needed a permanent home for it. And that's when I came up with this idea of a teaching observatory. And out of the blue came along a benefactor, Dr. Dennis Saunders, and his wife, Mrs. V. Saunders. And I remember the conversation, and Dennis just said, "Well, okay, how much would it cost to do this? How much would it cost to build this observatory?" And I told him, I gave him a conservative figure, it was $20,000 at the time, and he said, "Yep, all right, we'll fund it." And that's what they did. Now, fast forward 5 years, they've since contributed around $100,000 of their own money into building this facility. When we finished MSAT-1 a couple of years ago, it was so successful, she was oversubscribed in a very short period of time. And Dennis just said, "Well, you're going to have to build another one." And that's how MSAT-2 came about. So a lot of people have contributed. People have contributed money. People have contributed time, expertise. People have contributed construction of the observatory. Both domes were built with the assistance of parents and students. So it's very much a community involvement in constructing this. And now Canberra has a facility, a high-end facility, for teaching students science through astronomy.
Wonderful. So something, we're going to take questions towards the end, but this is sort of a bit of a question that's been popped into the Q&A area, which is also a curiosity of mine, Geoff. So can you actually, does it need to be dark outside for telescopes to actually work? So can you see them can you see things during the daytime? And, you know, it's not quite dark now. So can you?
It depends on what you want to look at. Think of it this way: if you go to the movies, and if you're like me, you've been to a B-grade theatre and they start the movie without turning the lights off, that's kind of what it is for astronomy done during the daytime. There are some things that you can see best during the daytime. The obvious one is the sun. You can't see that at night for obvious reasons, but you know, you can see that fair enough. The planet Venus can be seen during the daytime. But other than that, no, you need the end of astronomical twilight, which is about an hour and a half after sunset. You need to get the sky as dark as possible. But that actually does touch on another problem that we're facing in all Australian cities at the moment. That's an issue called light pollution, where the spread of suburbia and the use of inefficient lighting design means that artificial light is simply being shone up into the atmosphere where it makes it glow for precisely the same reasons that the sun makes the sky bright during the daytime. And that's an issue that everybody into astronomy is having to deal with. But having said that, I've just got to point out one thing. Our latest development is building a prototype radio telescope to complement MSATs 1 and 2. And of course, you can use the radio telescopes at any time of day or night.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. So your more recent work, Geoff, has involved students in observing binary star orbits.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about what that actually means in practice?
Yeah, sure. So this is one example. We've actually got 25 projects running at the moment across the full range of aspects of astronomy. But a little bit of hand waving first. So a binary star, and most stars in the galaxy are binaries. Our sun, being a single star, is in the minority, in fact. So you've got two stars that are orbiting around each other. Now, I'll show you a picture in a minute of what one of these stars looks like. But suffice it to say, you don't see two stars. These things are so far away, it's kind of like trying to distinguish two headlights on a car. If the car is so far away, you just see it as one. And you may say, well, how do you know it's a binary star? The answer is that when the two stars are orbiting one another, when they're side by side, you see the combined brightness of the stars. When they pass one behind the other, the brightness drops, and then when they re-emerge from that eclipse, the combined brightness can be observed. And again, I'll just share the screen to show you. There we go. That is an actual image of one of the binary stars that one of my students is observing at the moment. As you can see, it just looks like any other star. But over a period of hours, if we monitor the brightness of the star, we produce a graph something like this. Now, what we've got up the top here, this plot here, is the brightness of one of the background stars. So that's our reference point. The binary star, this is the brightness, and as they're side by side, you get one brightness, but as it moves into eclipse, the brightness drops. It reaches a minimum and then turns back up again as it emerges from eclipse. And what the student has to do is produce some sort of a simulation. She's presently just completing writing code that will allow her to analyse that light curve and produce a fit, sort of a model of a binary star that fits the observed curve, and that way she'll be able to determine what this star's orbit is all about. So that's an example that we're doing projects, as I say, across a full range of astronomical subjects.
Yeah. So that's one excellent example. So what other sorts of projects have sparked your students' interest, Geoff?
Yeah, in Science Mentors more broadly, which is the program that I run down here, Science Mentors ACT, we basically cover every branch of science you can imagine, everything from quantum mechanics through to anthropology this year. I've had students build hovercrafts as engineering projects. I've had one of the girls this year is doing a genetics project by doing cross-pollination of plants. So she's growing a first generation of plants, getting them to flower, cross-pollinating the plants to produce a second generation, and so on. Computer coding, the whole lot. So we've got lots and lots of different projects across the full range of sciences and engineering.
And so, I mean, you're very strong on encouraging young women to go into science. And, you know, that's something that you've always held as a very much a core part of your practice as a mentor. And why is it so critical that we have many more young women in the STEM disciplines and doing astronomy in particular in this instance?
Well, it's not just women getting into astronomy. I mean, there's relatively few jobs in astronomy, as you can imagine. So some make it into astronomy as professionals, but many people who get PhDs in astronomy, they end up working in other fields that can utilise that same skill set. But to getting girls into science and engineering is just so obvious to most of us, because otherwise you're just throwing away 50% of your brain power in society. And it's such a tragic loss. The other reason why, well, there's a range of reasons why I want to get girls into science and engineering. And I think it's very much because so many young people are not realising their potential. They're not fulfilling their dream. They're not realising their capacity, if you like, if we don't give them these opportunities. And regrettably, in science, there are still people, tragically people my age, who hold on to some pretty archaic ideas about whether women can do science or not. You know, it's completely absurd. And this is something that I actually have to spell out to my kids. You know, your intelligence, your intellectual capacity has got nothing to do with your gender, but you have to spell it out because the perceived reality is quite different. And this is something that I want to emphasise whenever I get the chance, because people talk about, you know, getting girls into STEM in schools. Well, I'm sorry, the problem is not in the schools. School teachers are punching above their weight with this issue. In fact, science mentors for the last, well, ever since the beginning, has actually been dominated by girls. It's usually about a 60-40 split. So that's not where the problem occurs. The problem occurs in the later years of schooling, particularly year 11 and 12, where the students are not choosing science. And it's not because it's too hard, I don't think. I think the girls are not choosing science because they just don't see it as a viable career path. And that's because we don't have enough women in the tertiary sector who can say, yes, I've made it as a scientist. Now that's changing slowly, but I have spoken to a number of people that have said, yeah, there are still people in the university sector who still have these silly ideas that girls can't do science. While we're on that topic, one of the other myths I like to dispel is this idea that when it comes to the mentors, that the younger, you know, the PhD students and so on make better mentors because they can relate to the kids because they're closer in age. I haven't seen a single piece of evidence to support that notion. From my experience, and I've had young women, PhD students teaching young men, I've had old emeritus professors, men teaching young women, and every combination in between, and it just makes no difference. What carries the partnership through is the scientist's love of their subject. That's what the kids pick up on. I've seen no influence of age or gender on the actual teaching process.
And so would you say that that love of subject or that passion actually is what, if young people in schools have a passionate science teacher, is that infectious?
I don't see how it can't be. Again, one of the things that frustrates me about education is an over-reliance on things you can point to, such as a curriculum or a classroom or technology, that type of thing. Now, these are useful tools, but my conclusion after 3 decades in this game is 90% of what the kids learn is not in the curriculum. 90% of what the kids pick up on is the teacher's love of learning, their humility before the facts, their capacity to listen to other people, including the students, their, you know, just this whole package of saying learning is good, But the other thing that the kids need to pick up on and need to learn is a work ethic. As you and I both know, anything worthwhile having usually involves a lot of hard work. And that, to me, I think is the winning combination. I've spoken to literally hundreds of scientists and engineers from the entire spectrum of sciences. And one of the things I say to the kids is, look, these guys are not geniuses. And I use the term guys generically, by the way, it's just male or female. They're not geniuses. They all share two qualities. One, they love their subject, absolutely fascinated by it. And the second one is they're prepared to work bloody hard in order to learn about it. They're the two things that actually result in a high quality scientist or an engineer. And quite frankly, it's probably the same in every other branch of human thought as well. It's not just limited to science and engineering. But I mean, there are some freaks of nature that are just off the wall geniuses. We've seen that throughout history. But most scientists have those two qualities. And I've had that confirmed by these scientists and engineers too. They nod and say, yep, that's exactly what it's like.
Yeah, some excellent observations. Look, and so Geoff, I want to ask you now, you're a great teacher. There's no two ways about that. And you've got a cabinet full of extraordinary accolades. Well, maybe not on a cabinet, they might be sitting on a wall and so on. But I'm really keen to understand what actually ignited your love of science. Was it an experience you had? Was it your parents, or was it a teacher at school?
The first thing I've got to say, Jane, is there are teachers out there much, much better than me in the classroom. I mean, if there's any Star Trek fans out there that will appreciate what I'm saying, I'm actually part Klingon. Right? I am not one of these teachers that can instantly engage and entertain young people. I've never had that skill. I've seen other teachers do it, and I don't know how they do it. I'm more of an infrastructure builder myself. But getting back to your question, I wasn't inspired. In fact, it actually works the other way around with me. I can't remember a time when I wasn't fascinated by all of the sciences. When I was a kid in primary school, I dabbled in chemistry and biology, but it was astronomy that really grabbed me and never let go. But when I got to high school, I had all of that beaten out of me. My confidence was just eroded almost completely by some people who I won't even refer to them as teachers. The turnaround came, and again, I'm going to give full credit where it's due. When I was in my mid-20s and I met who was going to become my wife, and the way that I like to put it is she said, "Stop being a buffhead." Yes, dear. And that was the turning point. She was the one who enabled me to do what I'm doing now, because she just got behind me and said, "You do this." So yeah, it's come full circle. I've gotten into science through the back door in many respects. But like any adult, you simply look at your life and think, yeah, that wasn't real good. How am I going to fix it? What can I do to make sure that doesn't happen again? But that's what we all do, really.
Yes, yeah, fascinating. I mean, it's just interesting how, the pathways that your career has taken, and there's been some key points, and you've met so many people across your life. But I was interested, I've had a look at your book, In Search of Dark Matter, that you wrote about 14 years ago now. And you actually talk, dark matter is a subject that I don't know a lot about, but it's something that a cousin of mine was very interested in. And one of the conversations I remember that we always used to have was about sort of this, it being a sort of a profoundly difficult problem to solve, the whole notion of dark matter. So not knowing then what makes up most of the known universe goes to the heart of how we understand our place in it. So that the book of yours, I recall that you actually talk about the contemporary explanations that Jan Ort gives for the nature of dark matter and its role in the origin and evolution of the universe. So do you think it's actually still important to, science, I think over time, there are certain flavors and brands and things like that. But do you think it's actually still really important to focus on dark matter? Is it a relevant problem still?
Yeah, relevance is very much a value-laden word, isn't it?
Yes.
Look, the dark matter problem and what's come after that, of course, which is dark energy, really is, and this is not my phrasing, but it is a very common one, it's the ultimate Copernican revolution, where not only aren't we the centre of the universe, we're not even made up of the same stuff as the rest of the universe. But the thing that it reminds me of every time I think about it is we just don't know. There's a very important scientist by the name of Professor Ron Eakers, and I remember sitting in on a seminar of his many, many years ago, and he said, look, there are some people who think we've almost got the last bits of information. You know, we're just going to put in a few details and we'll have a comprehensive understanding of the universe. And he said to him, that's nonsense. We've got as much to learn as we've ever had. And astronomy, when you think about it, and this is probably an important point to cover, astronomy is a pretty useless science when you think about it, in terms of what's it going to give back to society, at least on the surface. You know, it's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help feed anybody. It's not going to help anybody drive faster or more efficiently or anything like that. And I know that there are some people who talk about spin-offs from the space age and astronomy and so on. I think they've completely missed the point. There are some areas of human thought which are not pursued because they have any practical benefit. Examples such as art and music and literature. These things do not have any practical benefit. They are cultural activities. And we do them because they're one of the reasons why we stay alive and why we want to keep living. And astronomy is like that. It's right up there with archaeology and paleontology. It's simply a science that helps us understand ourselves. And I think it was probably never better illustrated. In fact, I've got an example to show you. You possibly remember the Earthrise photograph. I'm just going to fast forward to that picture, if I can find it. Here we go. And let me see, share screen again. This photograph was taken, let's see, here we go. At least it should be. No, it's not sharing my screen for some reason. Can you see that at all?
No, I can't see it. So
hang on a second. Technical issues.
Yes, that's we're a long way away from each other. So at this time of day, here we go. Fantastic. It's there. Wow, what an amazing photograph.
Oh, yeah. I don't get stopped by things like that. But that beautiful photograph that was taken Christmas Eve 1968 by the Apollo 8 astronauts, which were the first spacecraft. Apollo 8 or Apollo 9? I think it might have Apollo 9. Anyway, and that photograph shows our planet as it is. It is completely isolated. There are some people who think, oh yeah, we can go to Mars and set up shop there. Complete fantasy. And I can justify all that too. We've got one shot at survival and that's it. We're looking at it there. Years later, this photograph was taken by Voyager 2 at the insistence of a rather extraordinary scientist and teacher by the name of Carl Sagan. And that little pale blue dot is Earth. That's us. Yeah. Every single bit of history is tied up with that one planet. And one of the organisers for this event today, Jackie, reminded me and sent through this beautiful photograph taken by the Cassini spacecraft. Again, that's Earth seen from Saturn. And what I'm trying to get at is this is one simple example of what astronomy does for us. It reminds us of our fragility, our uniqueness, and our isolation. And as far as we know, we're the only intelligent species in the universe. Astronomy teaches us this. There could be others. My personal conclusion is we're not alone, but we've got no evidence one way or the other at the moment. And so we need, it shifts your mindset, if you see what I'm getting at. It changes the way we view ourselves. And in my opinion, there's no other branch of human thought that actually does that. And so this is the importance of astronomy, that it teaches us something about ourselves.
Yeah. So that's really about, you know, it's a very philosophical idea, really, in terms of, you know, getting ourselves in perspective. And I was just thinking, you know, there is no planet B. You know, we're planet A, and that beautiful photograph, the blue planet. I mean, that's just was stunning.
Mm.
So, and are the students responsive to those ideas as you weave them in terms of the importance of astronomy and their projects that they're doing?
Look, some are. The ones that take up the astronomy, they get hooked on it. I've got two young ladies at the moment that just are absolutely convinced they want to pursue research careers in astronomy. But then again, another one of my girls, Lainey, she did a couple of MSAT projects back in the very early days. She's just been enrolled in a medical course at University of Canberra. You know, so not everybody goes down the astronomy path. And at the same time, we've got other students that just can't figure out why anybody would be interested in astronomy. Why aren't they interested in genetics? But I mean, that's the whole point, guys. I want my students to find out what their passion is. And it's not everybody's going to be into astronomy. But what I encourage through all of these different projects is to get them to find out what they're passionate about. And I say to them, you'll know what you're passionate about because you won't for the life of you understand why everybody else doesn't love it too. Now, for me, it's astronomy and science teaching as a result of things that happened in my youth. And I just think, well, you know, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and change things back again. So, you know, read into that what you like. But everybody has their own passion. And the thing is, I say to the kids, you'll never be outstanding at anything you don't love. So you got to find out what you love. So, yeah.
That passion is absolutely critical. Yeah, I mean, it's with the pandemic this year, it almost seems to me that it's a perfect STEM moment. I mean, there are so many branches of scientists, you know, under the sort of STEM, if you like, that are actually working together. The news media has been dominated with scientists and, you know, a whole range of epidemiologists that have been reporting and so on, that health broadcasts, etc. So do you think that COVID-19 has actually presented a kind of a perfect STEM moment?
I don't think I'm clever enough to give an answer to that question, to be perfectly honest. It's so complicated and there are people far smarter than me working on it. I do, however, have some opinions on it. I think it's what we're seeing that has resulted in things like second waves and so on, is a direct consequence of a deficiency of scientific literacy. And I'm not saying that everybody should be a scientist, but I am saying everybody should be scientifically literate. Everybody should understand what science is. One of the things that society is learning the hard way is that science is not linear. You don't go from A to B to C to D to a cure for cancer. If it did, we'd have a cure for cancer by now, but it doesn't work that way. And the same thing with a vaccine for COVID. And one of the issues that I've struggled with all my adult life anyway, at least while I've been a teacher, is this business of why do people resist accepting the conclusions of science? And I've never really come up with any complete solutions or complete answers to that. But there was a book written by a fellow called Michael Shermer a number of years ago, and he actually put it quite well. He wrote a book that was called Why Do People Believe Weird Things? And he covered all the different types of superstitions and false beliefs, UFOs, ghosts, the whole lot. But at the end of it came to the conclusion that one of the most important reasons why people believe things that are completely irrational is because it's so much easier and it is more comforting. And I think in this case, it's possibly more comforting to say, oh, the COVID outbreak really isn't that bad. I don't have to wear a face mask. It can't be that bad. And we're being hammered by nature into reality.
Yeah.
So again, one of the things that astronomy teaches us is that the universe is, it's neither kind nor cruel. It's just completely indifferent. Next week, when there's a first quarter moon, if people look up at the moon, they'll realise it's been there for the last 4.5 billion years, and it's going to be there for another few 100 million years, long after humanity has turned to dust. But people don't like to think that we're that fleeting. They like to think we're the centre of the universe and that we were put here to have dominion over the earth. Well, I mean, that's pure nonsense, and the Australian Aborigines know that very, very well, and that's one of the things we've got to learn from these people. So yeah, so one of the great tragedies of my life, or not tragedies, but disappointments, I think is a better way of putting it, is I always thought education was the key. But having met, for instance, one senior academic once who was an astrophysicist, so he taught cosmology, he taught stellar evolution, all of these sort of things by day, but he was also a fundamentalist Christian who believed in a 6-day creation 6,000 years ago. So people have this incredible capacity to hold completely opposite views at the same time. So while education is critical and it's essential, it's not sufficient. And if I knew what was sufficient, I'd be a very happy man, but I just don't, and so I'm not.
Yeah, interesting. So I mean, out of this pandemic then, I mean, are there 3 wishes, if you like, that you would like to see? I mean, it's so interesting what you were saying there about, you know, almost people have had to embrace science because they've been bombarded with news reports, broadcasts every which way across, you know, sort of from March onwards. I mean, are there particular things that you would like to see come out of this sort of awareness raising, if we could even call it that?
Again, I just don't know.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've gotten into the habit of doing over the years is always consulting people who know more than I do. And so when it comes to COVID-19, I mean, I hang on Norman Swan's every word. It's the man.
I think we all do.
This is his business. He's a smart cookie, and you listen to people that know what they're talking about. Nobody can be an expert at everything. What would I like to see come out of this? Greater confidence in science, because science is what's going to drag us out of this mess that we're in at the moment, not just COVID, but climate change as well. This is a scientific issue, and maybe people will start to have a little bit more respect for science. I don't know, but
there's a lot of insight there, Geoff. Thank you so much. And I think we might turn now to some, because there's a number of questions that have been popping up into the Q&A. So I just wondered if we could address, I'd like to ask you some of those. And one of the questions that people are curious about is, you know, for example, what do you think of future telescopes going to mainly do in space? Or will they actually be not located on the ground as such? Will they be located in space?
Probably not, because getting things into space is so terribly expensive. You know, it would be wonderful if we could put 6-metre telescopes or 10-metre telescopes into Earth orbit. But even the Hubble, as fantastic as an instrument as that was, the reason why it had that diameter mirror is because that's the only thing that would fit in the space shuttle payload bay. Getting into space is dangerous and it's expensive. But what the engineers, and this is why engineers are so cool, what they've been able to do is to come up with workarounds to create big telescopes on Earth that counter the effects of the Earth's atmosphere, because the Earth's atmosphere that is the biggest problem. It distorts images and so on, in the same way that if you had a book and you put it at the bottom of a swimming pool and you were standing on the edge looking at the book, you could see the book was there, but because of the rippling of the water, you probably wouldn't be able to see the details that you want. And the Earth's atmosphere does the same thing to light coming from galaxy stars, whatever you're looking at. But the engineers are continually coming up with new means to counter those effects. And this is why in places like Chile and so on, these super telescopes that are being built are put there. They're high, they're still going to look through the atmosphere, but they're able to do these extraordinary things that rival and in many ways surpass what Hubble's been able to do while they're still on the ground. And the Australia telescope is another example of that sort of thing. the square kilometre array that's being shared between Western Australia and South Africa. So no, I think in the distant future, we might see large telescopes put into space, but it's just so expensive. It's more efficient to work smart on the surface of the Earth.
Interesting. Yeah, and this is a question I want to, in our chat around students' passion and engagement in astronomy. Most schools don't have access to the sort of resources that you have, but so how does a science teacher in the high school context actually really draw students' interest in astronomy, or is that not as important, the subject specifically? You know, should it just be about engagement in science more broadly?
The reason why MSAT is such an important facility is, as you say, your average high school could never afford something like this. I mean, this is a $100,000 facility, which sounds a lot, and it is a lot, but it's nowhere near as much money as you could spend. You know, if somebody gave me $1 million, I could spend it tomorrow quite happily, and I'll be a very happy teacher. But what MSAT is a model of how we can build specialised equipment that can be shared across a range of schools. And so MSAT is available to all students in the ACT, public and private. And I just don't see any reason why we can't replicate this model in other branches of science, creating dedicated teaching facilities in geology, in genetics, in physics, whatever, and make it available to high school students. But your correspondent is absolutely correct. There's no way in the world that public schools can afford this sort of thing. And the same is true here in Canberra, but it doesn't need to be. I mean, not every school needs an MSAT because there's just not enough students in a given school interested in astronomy that would benefit from this facility. But across the ACT, there are. And that's why every year we put through 25 students doing these high-end projects. And that's basically running at capacity. Because this is not outreach, by the way. It's not students coming up looking through the eyepiece and going, ooh, ah. It's students coming up here every week for up to 2 hours a session, in the cold, in the dark, gathering data. And we're doing that in other areas as well, as I said before, in all these other branches of science. So I think it's a matter of creating facilities that students across a range of schools can actually use.
We certainly need a lot more philanthropy and the likes of the Saunders family that gave that 20,000 to you, I think, Geoff.
That was just the initial, and every year it went up and they just kept saying yes.
Yeah.
This facility would not exist without Dennis and V. Saunders.
Amazing. And so if you had some advice, I mean, I guess the teacher education, that's sort of my background. And if you had some advice for secondary science teachers, I mean, I guess when you do your teacher education, you don't necessarily specialise in one particular area. And so how can you continue that professional learning as a teacher once you start to teach in schools in those other disciplines within science more broadly?
That's not really a question for me. That's more a question for the organisations that employ teachers, to make it possible for teachers to spend 3 months at a university somewhere, expanding their knowledge, so that they have time to learn. And the only problem is that's an expensive proposition. I've got no solution for that. I'm not saying it's easy by a long shot, but I am saying if we want science teachers to continue learning, you've got to give them the space and the time to do it. It's not something you can just do on the weekend. Teachers, as you know, are flat out all the time. They work way, way beyond the paid hours. They're doing things like putting their own money into just keeping their classes and courses running. That's what teaching is all about. To ask them to voluntarily undertake further courses and so on, I think is a bit of an ask. But having said that, there are scholarships, I believe, and opportunities provided by educational organisations to help teachers, you know, expand their skills. But I think it needs to be expanded considerably.
Yeah, and once more, we need a lot more money for those sorts of expansions, and also from what I've observed over time, I mean, for teachers to continuously upgrade their knowledge and understanding in science, because it's such a move of, well, I guess in all curriculum areas, you need to be up to date and make sure that your learning is relevant. So just you talked about your now wife, who said, you know, don't be a buffhead early on. And I'm just wondering, so why did you actually become a science teacher?
That is an interesting question. I started out actually as a tradesman. I was a spectacle maker. And I did that for 8 or 9 years before moving into teaching in TAFE. I taught optics for 13 years. And one of the sad things about automation is it tends to put people out of work. Well, in the optical industry and the spectacle industry, automation took over, and all of a sudden the trade died. Well, honestly, all of a sudden over a period of about 4 or 5 years, it died. And so I had to retrain as a high school teacher. And fortunately, the ACT welcomed me with open arms. It's been a wonderful arrangement ever since. But when I moved down here, the high school that I was appointed to said, well, look, you've got all this experience teaching optics, why don't you teach science? Because I was also a science writer for about a decade as well. So I had a very broad knowledge of science. I had technical expertise in optics and also optics teaching. And so I just sort of fell into science teaching. And again, my wife just kept encouraging me to learn, to do extra work and so on. So yeah, what you're seeing is one half of the arrangement, in other words. The other half's at home. Sorry, you've gone mute. I can't hear you, Jane.
I have got stiff competition outside with cockatoos, so I'm just going backwards and forwards in and out of mute. Just another question in our chat. What is the key to finding good mentors for students and developing meaningful projects?
That is a very good question. Now, I've got to start by saying I hate the word networking. I just despise it. It is so artificial.
Used a lot.
I just hate it. But I don't know what the key is to finding good mentors. I do know that the only way to recruit a mentor is to go out to the institutions, whether they're government labs or universities or CSIRO or whatever, sit down with them, buy them a cup of coffee and explain to them what you're trying to do and say, look, we've got these wonderful, talented young people. Because most scientists I've met, they almost regard teenagers as a different species. It's like, what is this thing called a teenager? I've never dealt with that before. And they're somewhat frightened. When I show them that the reports my kids have done, now the average length of the reports is 5,000 words. The longest ever written was 13,500 words in an area of pharmaceuticals. When I show them these potential mentors, what these kids can do, that's enough to get them to raise their eyebrows. Okay, I'll give it a shot. At the end of their first mentoring experience, they realise it's not only good for the kids, it's good for them for a whole range of reasons. And so the kid gets a lot out of it, the mentor gets a lot out of it, the parents are thrilled. But getting back to the original question, how do you do it? I don't know. I just go out there and I beg and plead and buy cups of coffee and just say, look, the kids need you. They really need you. And that's how you do it. But there's no easy way. If you flick an email, it'll end up in the trash, in the bin.
So are parents, I mean, many of our parents have, you know, structural engineers and so on. I mean, do they step forward in your experience to mentor students?
Yeah, sometimes. So most of the mentors are not parents of at least my students. I do have one professor working with me at the moment, a biologist, and he's turned out to be a fantastic mentor. He's mentoring a year 12 student at the moment. He has teenage children who are not interested in science, and I think maybe he's using this as an opportunity. Well, at least I get to teach one young woman about science. But no, most of the parents, they're tremendously supportive, and I do need to give praise to the parents of the MSAT students, because the dome that I'm sitting in at the moment, it's 3.5 meters diameter dome. And so the students up here at night with me, from the beginning, it's been policy to have a parent in the dome with me because it's dark and so on and so forth. And the parents, without a single exception, have been, yep, okay, I'll do that. So they sit in the dark. They can't even use their smartphone because we need to keep it as dark as possible for the instruments. Whatever temperature it is outside, if it's 2 degrees outside, it's 2 degrees inside, because telescopes don't like the heat. And the parents do this week after week after week, and knowing that they've got work the next morning. And so one of the things that I'm fond of saying is that if we've got extraordinary kids, it's because we've got extraordinary parents. And I just need to acknowledge that. These people are amazing.
Indeed. I mean, the swimming training is one thing, and so it's sort of the equivalent, isn't it, in terms of if you're going to sort of, I guess, support your child in their sporting prowess, for example, then it's a similar kind of rationale. So those -2 mornings, and often colder in Canberra, is something that I'm very familiar, having grown up in Canberra. And yes, that takes dedication, Geoff. Well, Geoff, that actually brings us to the end of today's session. And I'd just like to finish by thanking you so much for sharing your time with us this evening. And it's been a real delight to be able to speak to you, and so grateful for the terrific work that you do. I mean, you're not a person that blows their own trumpet. You do this work in the community silently, and you've received a number of well-deserved accolades, and I know absolutely that's not why you do it. But we, to have, I guess, in our population, teachers of science that are so dedicated and inspire the next generation is just such a gift. So everyone, I just wanted to say that this webinar is part of the UTS Illuminated webinar series, where you can gain insights from our 2020 game-changing alumni. And as you can see, with the conversation that we've been lucky enough to have with Geoff tonight, there are some other terrific Alumni Award winners. So I'd certainly invite you to come along on Thursday evening. Another Alumni Award winner is Emma Watkins, and you probably know her better as the Yellow Wiggle. So thank you so much, Geoff, again, for your time this evening. It's really appreciated. So for more information on this webinar series, you can visit the alumni.uts.edu site. And there's another very exciting development that has recently come on board, and that is the upcoming UTS Open Short course on engaging adolescent learners. And you could see from the work that Geoff does that he truly has engaged his adolescent learners. So we have a couple of teacher educators who are going to be teaching that short course, and there's information available on that exact course on the UTS Open website, and the URL for that is open.uts.edu.au. And when you get onto that link, you need to search for EAL, so Engaging Adolescent Learners. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and I look forward to hosting you at our next alumni event. And have a lovely evening. Thank you and good night.